Well, I'd like to just tell you a little bit about my motivations, and I'm going to try to be as short as I can so I can take your questions. But I suppose I could trace my relationships with the members of the Jewish community. They're just not members of the Jewish community, they're my friends. Back to something that my mother once told me. My mother was a pretty smart woman. Her mother could barely speak English. She was married to a man whose father was a coal miner. So they'd understood their share of struggles. And my mother told me one time, she said, "Johnny," when I was a very young man, she said, "Johnny, if you want to look for a really good friend, get somebody who's Jewish." And you know why she said that? She said, no matter what happens to you, your friend, your Jewish friend, will stick by your side and fight right with you and stand by you. I never forgot that from my mother, and my mother was right. So deep inside of my soul has been a sense of the Jewish community and the Jewish people. You know, when I think about what the Jewish family represents and what the culture represents, it could be the most important set of values and cultures in America. You know, and I'll tell you why. Because I've observed throughout my adult lifetime that as a Jew, you're supposed to live a life greater than yourself. The life is not just about you. It's about the people around you. It's about the community. Don't you think that's what our country needs? A sense, and not just our country, but in the West, that life is not just about ourselves, that life is about something bigger than ourselves. And this is a message that needs to be communicated to give people meaning. My great friend Brad Caston talked about my trip to Israel with Gordon Zaks, one of the great Jewish leaders. I agreed to go with Gordon to Israel soon after I was elected. I was about the age of 30 years old. And Gordon went on and on and on the airplane about how great it was going to be when we got to Jerusalem. And I'm like, Gordon, I've agreed to go on this trip with you, but I mean, can we knock it off already on the travel conversation we're having? And then we landed, and we got in the car, and we drove to Jerusalem. Have you ever seen a more magnificent city in the world? And I can't wait for the day for me to take my young 15-year-old daughters to Jerusalem, because it is a shining city, and it represents so much of human history. And what a great trip I had. And on that trip, after we'd moved through large parts of Israel, we were at the King David Hotel. And I had gone up to my room, and I came down, and there was a woman sitting at the table with Gordon. I said, who are you? She said, well, my name is Avital Sharansky. I said, well, who are you? She said, well, I'm on my way to Washington to meet with President Reagan to plead for the release of my husband, Anatoly, who's been locked in a Soviet prison because he dared be a refusenik. I looked at her and I said, you're going to go to Washington. Why don't we have a rally right on the steps of the Capitol and send a double message to the president and to the Soviets about your husband? And we did. And we did. But I had never met Anatoly Sharansky in person until I read one of the most remarkable books I've ever read in my lifetime, called Fear of Evil. Sharansky I'd never met, but I wanted so much to meet him. And one time, Gordon Zaks gave me the opportunity to talk to him in a phone conversation. And I expressed my admiration, because as we all know, the Soviets told Sharansky, repent. After all, take back what you said. After all, Galileo did it. And in his book, Fear No Evil, Sharansky writes that if they used Galileo against me, they will not use Sharansky against another prisoner of conscience. And I wanted to meet this man. Gordon Zaks died. There was a funeral service. There were 3 speakers scheduled. Richard Allen, the former National Security Advisor to President Reagan, John Kasich, the governor of Ohio, and Anatoly Sharansky. I called one of my friends and said, I can't make this talk. How can I stand on a podium with a guy like Sharansky and Richard Allen? What do I do? He said, be short. Well, God must have had mercy. Sharansky was delayed. But I got to meet him, shake his hand, and give him a hug at the burial site of Gordon Zaks. That's what life is all about, and meaning and purpose. Well, folks, I know that you know this, but when we think about 9/11, when we think about Chattanooga and Fort Hood, when we think about Charlie Hebdo, when we think about the slaughter at the Jewish delicatessen, and then we look at Paris, there can be no doubt that this is an effort to destroy our very way of life, to destroy civilization, to destroy respect for women, to destroy the sense of education and progress and science and civilization, and to destroy the concept that we should live a life greater than ourselves. The president went to Paris and said we were going to fight terrorism by taking on climate change. If I were president, I would be at that meeting, and I would be talking to all of our allies in NATO, and I would be seeking out our friends or people who have the same purposes in the Middle East. Because I remember when the ambassador from Egypt to the United States stood in the Rose Garden and announced a coalition of people to push Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait. That was a serious matter. But it pales into comparison to what we face today. The President of the United States needs to lead, and he needs to lead a coalition to stop the delay, to stop the politics, put people in the air and on the ground, and for once and for all, go and destroy ISIS where they exist. You know, you come to an event like this and you expect it to, kind of political talk. This is not politics, folks. I've got those young daughters, and I know what is at stake here. And since last February, I have been arguing for an effort to destroy these people. So you'll mark my words. Someday we will have boots on the ground. Someday we will have a coalition. But the longer we wait, the higher price we will pay. And this is a fight about our existence. This is existential. Now, at the same time, I know the president has said, or his administration has said, we need to lead from behind. And you know what happens when we lead from behind? Well, we have a situation where we didn't support the rebels in Syria. We see the Russians building an S-400 air defense system that frankly limits the flexibility, the ability, and the strategic needs, not just of the United States, but Turkey and Israel. Just an article today about the impact on Israel with the S-400 because there was a void. We've not created no-fly zones. We've not created sanctuaries. We have not armed the Kurds to the degree that we should so we could work with them to do more effective work against ISIS, the only group in the Middle East that's actually working that way. And the void means that it's filled by forces that are not in our interests, and our interests are only in the interest of opportunity, the free world, equality, not repression, not dictatorship. You know, America and the West was founded on principles of respect for life, the belief that we can change the world, as Mr. Kasten referred to, that sits on that Holocaust memorial. These are serious matters. Over in the Ukraine, the people there just ask for support from the United States to defend themselves. We're absent. The Russian bear bears down on the Baltics, on the Finns, on the Swedes. Very serious matters. We look at China and their ability to hack and to launch cyber attacks against us, and we can't seem to deal with that. We have to lead, because when America leads, people follow, and that doesn't mean it's easy. That means you need to sit and listen and negotiate and work and ultimately convince people of the need to take collective action, to continue to support the ideals of the West. And that is not inconsistent with the moderate Arabs. Because, you know, they know in Jordan, and they know in Saudi, and they know in the Gulf states, and they know in Egypt, it's just a matter of time until this evil tries to take and is effective in taking them down. We can unite. We can get this done. And we have to rebuild our military. And we can rebuild our military, but I have to also tell you, we need to reform that building over there, that Pentagon, so that we're not spending money on overhead or duplication or waste and depriving our men and women in the military of the resources they need. But aside from all of that, doesn't it trouble you that America cannot seem to be able to solve problems? We can't seem to get our spending in line. We can't seem to balance a budget. We can't seem to clean up a tax code. We can't seem to deal with this regulatory morass that is shutting down the efforts of small business people to create jobs and strengthen our families. You know, the world looks at us and they wonder, what's happened to America? Now, this is a Republican gathering, but our friends in the Democratic Party are not our enemies. We can disagree with them on a number of issues, but we don't need to hate them. I served in Congress when it was possible for Republicans and Democrats to disagree 80 or 90% of the time, but then we came together at times because we put America first. Well, I was there when we balanced the budget. I spent 10 years of my life to get that done because I didn't think we should put a burden on our children. And I knew that by putting ourselves on the path to cutting taxes and balancing budgets, we'd have jobs. And we all know that jobs are the most important thing for all of us because that's what strengthens our families and gives our children opportunity. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we need to fix it. We need to come together. I became governor of Ohio. Oh, it was a mess. Down 350,000 jobs and credit going down the drain, and today we're up almost 400,000. We are running surpluses, we have cut taxes, and as a result of our growth, today we leave no one in the shadows. The mentally ill, the drug addicted, and the working poor all have a place in our society. Now, I don't tell you that record to brag. I tell you that record because we need to be in a position of have somebody who's actually demonstrated their ability to achieve significant things. Brad Kasten mentioned that I flew in here for the Netanyahu speech, and it was the first time that I had sat on the House floor since I'd left Congress in 2000. when I left, somebody said, "Why did it take you so long to come back here for a session?" I said, "Well, when you graduate from high school, you shouldn't drive around in the parking lot." And you know why I came in? Netanyahu, Israel. Could you imagine that a prime minister of one of the greatest allies we have comes into town to make a talk, and the president decides not to meet with him? Any prime minister that comes to America, if I happen to be president of the United States, will have a significant, great meeting with me if I'm president, and we will hold them up. You know, sometimes we are a little tougher on our family, right, than we are on people we don't know. And sometimes we're a little tougher on our friends than we are on our enemies. That's got to stop. That's got to stop. You know, I guess I could, just about 9 minutes left. I guess I could launch into a lot of good rhetoric, but I want you to understand something from me. You tell me where we have a better ally that has more guts, more courage, more strength, more values than the state of Israel. And you know, the state of Israel is also great because it's underpinned by you. They asked me before I came in here, what about the Republican-Jewish coalition? What is that all about? Can you say something good? You know what it is? You're educated, you're smart, you're passionate, you're strong, and you believe in things. You believe in things that really matter here in the 21st century. And I want you to know something. So do I. And I will stand with you as long as I am a public official, and when I am not, I will continue to stand with you any way I can. Because standing with you means standing for the future. It means standing for humanity. It means all the right things about how we exist in the world, on the globe, and assuring future generations peace and prosperity and faith. Thank you.
So thank you, Governor. We have about 8 minutes. In all the questions that came in for you, they really came, there were two main questions. I'm going to leave the more wonky question to the end because I figured you could probably take all 8 minutes with that. So let me go to one of the main questions that was on people's mind, and has to go back to one of the previous debates. And there was an exchange about Iran. And you had questioned some of your opponents, some of the other candidates, who say that they're going to rip up the Iran deal on day one, and there was some back and forth on that. Can you share with our folks where you?
Yeah. Well, look. First of all, it's a ridiculous deal because what happened was they were in search of an agreement, regardless of what the agreement was. But I don't know why I would be trying to be able to telecast. At that time, about 18 months ahead of what I might do in regard to that agreement. Now, here's the other thing that I think is really, really important. I believe that we can act stronger when we can be a collective group. I want the Brits and the French and the Germans and the Belgians and the Spanish, I want them to be part of who we are, because in a group, collectively, we are stronger than when we go alone. Now, I'm prepared to go alone. If the Iranians violate this agreement, which it looks like maybe perhaps they already have, or that they probably will, then we withdraw and we slap on sanctions. But let me ask you a question. If America slaps on sanctions, is it as effective as when we slap on sanctions and everyone in the West does? I believe that it means more. And I but I'd do it unilaterally. But I think collectively we are much stronger. And I believe at this point the President of the United States ought to be talking to our folks also about if that deal is violated, we're going to move and we're going to move quickly. No ifs, ands, or buts. Now, the other thing I would tell you is if I had information or intelligence that they were building a nuclear weapon, we wouldn't be in favor in any way, shape, or form of them having that kind of a weapon. Now, I guess if you're inexperienced, you say, I'm going to go and blow the place up. But when you're an executive and a commander-in-chief, your words are clear. Somebody said, well, if you put a no-fly zone in Syria and they fly in, what would you do? I said, well, if they flew in the first time, I might let them fly out. If they flew in the second time, they wouldn't be flying out. But I don't have to go and use that kind of fiery rhetoric. Executives have to be calm, tough, firm, and decisive. If you notice, the leaders of this world who are the most effective, that's how they operate. And by the way, when you're an executive, I used to be a congressman 18 years. I've been governor now. The difference between an executive and a legislative, not that big a difference. Only the difference between day and night. And as an executive in a big state, by the way, the last time I checked, no Republican had ever been elected president if they didn't win Ohio. As an executive in a big state, over the course of the years that I've been in, I've dealt with one crisis after another. And each time you deal with one, you learn. And you get better. And you get stronger. And you calm people that are around you. That's what's so important about being an executive, because as President of the United States, every day, every single day, it's another thing that flies at you. You don't learn on the job. You got to have dealt with these things to be the most effective you can be.
Right. And then finally, the more wonky question, going back to your past tenure as chairman of the Budget Committee. Folks want to know how it is that you're going to cut the debt, deal with entitlements, and at the same time rebuild
Perfect.
our
I
military.
can do that really, really short.
Okay.
Here's what you do. First of all, you have an economic plan. I've done this now twice, in Ohio and in Washington. The formula is simple. You reduce taxes to a point where it's going to provide economic growth. When people say they're going to have a 10% flat tax, we got one candidate running, his tax plan would increase the debt by $11-12 trillion, okay? You just can't do that. You can't grow your way out of everything. You reduce those taxes, 28% top rate, 15% capital gains. I've cut capital gains in Congress. We have reduced income taxes and killed taxes on small business in Ohio. You reduce taxes. Corporate taxes down to 25%. Do not double tax. Bring the money home from Europe so people invest in America and they're not investing in Europe. And give them the ability to write off the investment in plant and equipment. And as those investments have shrunk, that is why our economy is not growing. Businesses have not invested in plant and equipment, and it has to happen. So you get the corporate rate down, you get the personal rates down, which are achievable because they're not way out of the ordinary. And then what you do is you restrain spending. You take your Medicaid program from 5 to 3. My Medicaid program went from 10 to 2.5 with no one being cut off the rolls and without the loss of a benefit. You get your Medicare from a growth rate of about 7 to 5 with a whole series of things that we were able to do in Medicaid to still provide services but at a lower price. You freeze all non-defense discretionary. You shift some of these programs out of Washington, like education, like Medicaid, like transportation, like job training, and at the same time you boost your spending in defense. And then you freeze regulations for a year and you begin to put some rhyme and reason in the way we regulate. That would contribute to us about a 3.9% economic growth. We would have a balanced budget. We're officially saying in 8 years, some people say you could do it in 4. Give me a break. Okay, we could do it maybe in 7, maybe in 6 if we get the economic growth we anticipate. But I don't make false and phony promises to people. I want you to know that we will have a plan in the first 100 days to rebuild the military, a plan in the first 100 days to fix the taxes, to balance the budget, to control spending in a reasonable way that I believe people can sign on to. And maybe in maybe at the same time we also could work to secure our borders, create a guest worker program, and people who broke the law to get here, if they haven't broken the law since then, we can put them on a path to legalization by forcing them to pay a penalty. And that could settle this issue once and for all, and we'd control that border. Now, all those things, I believe, can be presented in the first 100 days. Now, you have 3 months, 4 months, Gary, for a leader to put an agenda on the table that can unite both wings of the party and perhaps even bring in some of my friends in the Democratic Party to lift America. We can't keep fumbling and fighting and being unable to solve our problems. And by the way, some of you will be skeptical about this, but if there's one single thing we need a constitutional amendment to require a federally balanced budget so politicians will do their job in Washington, okay? So I guess we're out of time. Thank you all very much, and we'll see you again.
Governor, thank you.